We are live here from Brixton, and this is the Alliance for Police Accountability meeting on the Baroness Casey review. We apologise for being slightly late. First of all, can we say to everybody watching online, and we've got a full house here in Brixton, that if you could share the live link with your friends and your colleagues and your neighbours, we'd deeply appreciate that. We want to get this conversation going right across the capital and London, and I'd be very grateful for your assistance. I'm joined as co-host today by a wonderful co-host, Janet Hills. Give her a round of applause, please.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the APA, another APA event, actually. Again, looking at the Casey review. I'm looking forward to hearing from our esteemed guests about how you, the community, can hold policing to account. It's really important that we're able to do that, especially at this time. So to give you a little bit of a background to the Casey review, it was the previous commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, that actually requested that a review take place into sexism and misogyny. And then amongst that, we now have the evidence that she found around racism, which again is, from her own perspective, worst she's ever known it to be. So it's really important that you have your voice and your say around how we can hold the police to account moving forward into the future.
And with that, we're going to move on to our introductions to the panel. So just 1 minute each, people, just introducing yourself, saying who you are. Abby. Hello. Can you hear? Is that?
I don't think I need a mic, do I?
You do for the people online to hear you.
Hello. Hello. Okay, yeah, I think that works. It's just I have to speak louder. Hi, I'm Abimbola Johnson. I am a defence barrister. I practice from Doughty Street Chambers, but I also chair the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board, which is tasked to scrutinise all 43 police forces, so not just the Metropolitan Police, but scrutinise their implementation of the National Race Action Plan, which is a programme they announced in June 2020, a plan that they released, the first version of which they released earlier this year. And the aim of that is to eradicate anti-black racism in policing. So it looks at 4 different areas. It looks at how the police protects black people when they come to them from positions of vulnerability. It looks at how the police use their powers in relation to interactions with black members of communities. It looks at internal culture and inclusivity. And it also looks at community engagement. So we also look at their data, we look at their evidence, we look at their communications around it too. So a big task. It's moving slowly. I look at Andy as I say that. But you know, we're in it to hold them to account and make sure that they deliver on the promises that they've made to us.
Evening, everybody. My name is Andy George. I'm president of the National Black Police Association. Also a police officer in the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Around policing, I joined policing. I was the second last Royal Ulster Constabulary squad. First 2 years of my career, I seen that fundamental changes in Northern Ireland to deal with sectarianism. Then become the president of the National Black Police Association around about 2.5 years ago. The National Black Police Association represent around about 50 local associations, cover officers and staff members from Black, Asian and other minority ethnic backgrounds. In and around 5,000 members or thereabouts across all of the UK. So all 43 forces in England and Wales, including the Met. We have Police Scotland, PSNI, and then a number of national ones, including National Crime Agency, British Transport Police, Civil Nuclear Defence Police, and the Ministry of Defence Police. Our part in this, I suppose, is we are officers and staff members, but we're also members of the communities you all come from as well. We kind of skirt both kind of parts of the puzzle, I suppose, in a lot of this. We also suffer discrimination, racism internally to policing, which the Casey review is obviously unearthed. It's something that we've been saying for a while, but we'll continue the discussion. We are pushing from the inside. We want to work with yourselves from community groups to try to make policing better. Thank you.
Hold on, just let's get some more people into the room. Yeah, there's plenty of chairs down here at the front. Glad to see you all. Go ahead.
Good evening. Jeremy Crook, Chief Executive of Action for Race Equality, a national charity based in King's Cross. We've been around for 31 years. We support young people and children, particularly in education, employment, and we do a whole heap of work around the justice system. We published in 2014 something called the Young Review, which looked at young black and Muslim men in the probation and prison service.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Timi Ukua. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Programs at the Black Equity Organisation. I'm also Interim CEO. We are a new civil rights organisation. We're set up just this year, so we're brand new. One of our key pillars is around criminal justice, immigration and rights. So policing and policing reforms is going to be a major part of the work that we're going to be doing around strategic litigation, but also around access to justice and how we can support black communities in how they access justice. One of the key things that we're going to be doing this year is working with Lee Jasper and the APA around some of the key areas such as the Casey interim report, but other things that have been long-term issues with black communities and policing in the UK. Glad to be here.
Thank
you. Hello, my name's Jackie Dyer. Great to see so many familiar faces in here. I'm the Deputy Leader of Lambeth Council. I'm also the founder of Black Thrive Lambeth, which is now Black Thrive Global. I work nationally around improving mental health services with NHS England and Health Education England, building equity and justice into both the workforce and policy and service transformation around mental health. And I'm really glad to be here. I'll speak a little bit later.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're going to take their views specifically on the Casey review, but just to give you a heads up on the Casey review. So, as people know, the former Commissioner, Cressida Dick, called in Baroness Casey to do a review, largely as a catalyst in response to the murder of Sarah Everard. People know the murder of Sarah Everard? She was killed by a serving police officer. And the whole scandal in relation to that really brought to a head some of the issues around culture. We've also had issues around policing WhatsApp groups with gratuitous, racist, offensive messages in those. People will know that Nicole Smallman and Bibi Henry, the two black women who were murdered, was it 18 months, 2 years ago now, I think. Their bodies were desecrated by the police officers guarding the crime scene, who shared pictures of the departed and teased around in WhatsApp groups, etc. And then there was a whole series of homophobic murders where gay people were being slaughtered in exactly the same place, usually at more or less the same time, and the Met didn't join the dots to make sure that this serial homophobic killer that was killing gay people in that area was caught. So both in terms of women, in terms of race and race equality, you know about the case of Chris Cabba, you know about all the other cases from Mark Duggan to Smiley Culture. And can I just say, there is a Deaths in Custody March on Saturday the 29th of October. It happens every single year. Numbers have been dwindling in recent years, so we hope that this year we guarantee. These are the flyers and leaflets for it. I'd be happy if you take one and see if you could attend on the day. But that's the background to the Casey Review. The Casey Review was published, and people were astounded and shocked and surprised. Well, we weren't astounded, shocked and surprised, because it actually confirmed the message that we've been giving to the Metropolitan Police Service, the Home Secretary and the Mayor for the last decade, which is institutionalised racism in the Met is getting out of control and the workplace culture is toxic. And those are the conclusions largely that Baroness Casey came to. So we're delighted that she's reinforced the issues that we've been raising as priorities. The question is, what do we as a community now do about it? Because what we don't want this report to do is follow the pattern of every other single report when it comes to race inequality. We're the most over-researched community, in ethnic community in Western Europe. There is no aspect of our lives that hasn't been measured and calculated and evaluated in terms of the impact of racism. And despite a 40-year canon of work that suggests that we do suffer discrimination as non-white peoples in the UK, very little has been done to tackle structural racism. And as we all know, this government denied the existence of structural racism. But the universe and the ancestors work funny. At the very time that they were declaring institutionalized racism does not exist in the UK, then we had a plethora of evidence that the universe produced, which proved absolutely otherwise. So that's the review. If you've not read it, please do go and read it. And now we're going to go hand over to our panel, and Janet Hills will take it from here. Janet.
Yeah, so I guess we're interested to hear from you about your views and opinions in relation to certain topics. So I'll go to you first. Who am I going to first, actually? Jackie. Okay, so just in terms of the crisis as we see it at the moment, how bad do you think the relationship between the Met Police is with the black community?
It's as Lee says, it's been... It's, as Lee has already articulated, it's shocking, it's abhorrent, and it's been allowed to exacerbate and continue for decades. It's not even a decade, it's beyond that. It's our experience as black African and Caribbean communities in particular, where we are dehumanized essentially and treated as fodder in terms of policing, and not in the same way as our fellow citizens are treated when it comes to policing. And I'm sure many on the panel will articulate further and deeper about it. But this is the time to do something about it, and there are opportunities to support the transformation of policing, which I might speak to a little bit later. But I think I would love to hear from my fellow panel members also.
Okay, so just in terms of that, again, the same sort of question, but if you had the opportunity to speak with the Commissioner and recommend any recommendations, what would they be?
I think for me, I think I was reading one of Lee's articles in The Voice, and about the impact that a well-intentioned and effective commissioner can have in terms of policing reforms in the UK. So we've got Sir Mark Rowley. He's come in recently. He's responded to this report. I think he's given a robust response from what he said. I think, but the devil's going to be in the detail. It's going to be what he does going forward. I think one of the things that I would say is that whatever he does, it has to be done in conjunction with the black communities, with identified community leaders, but also directly with black communities. The fact that there is so much distrust of the police in our community adds to the psychological harm and trauma that we already experience, which also impacts our well-being and mental health. So for us, it's not just about not feeling that psychological safety, it's also the impact that it has on our well-being and our mental health. So my recommendation would be to him to work directly, closely with us, to hear what we've got to say. They say it so often that the police needs to police with our consent, and they don't have our consent within the black community. So that would be my recommendation, that he works harder to understand where that distrust comes from, and work directly with communities to try and address some of those issues.
Brilliant, thank you. So Jeremy, I guess in terms of what you were speaking about in your introduction about the Young Review, we've had a number of reports over the years with recommendation after recommendation. How effective do you think these recommendations are in actually getting the job done?
Well, they haven't been that effective, have they? I think the trust and confidence in the black community has in the police remains very low compared to other communities in London. We still only have 4% of police officers who are black in the Met. It should be 13% to represent London. So this report by Baroness Casey will bring no surprise to many people who have been looking at the Met for a long time. And this is about the misconduct within the Met, and clearly the system is broken. If people in the Met, officers and staff, cannot get justice and fairness when they make complaints about sexual harassment and racism, then what chance have the public got when they make a complaint about the Met and their behaviour and attitudes? So it is very easy to say we need the Met to be accountable. What does that mean in terms of local communities? Who needs to be involved? How do you make sure the black community has the resource, the wherewithal to participate in scrutiny of the police, which is very time consuming, involves a lot of data and information, and therefore how do we empower our young people in particular to play that role? So clearly the new commissioners, as Baroness Casey has said, there's got to be a root and branch overhaul of the Met, not just in terms of the misconduct system. There's the whole issues around stop and search. There's the issue of the use of force. There's the issue of the gangs violence matrix. All of these things feed into a culture of institutional racism. Baroness Casey has talked about clear evidence of systemic bias, which is kind of different from systemic racism to a degree, but is strong enough from my point of view to obviously put a description on the Met, which the Met, I think, for many years has denied is the case, that there is a systemic problem, an institutional problem with the Met. So if Sir Mark Rowley accepts that, I think we can start to see we can all move forward together to change the Met culture and root out these people who seem to get away with anything in the Met, unfortunately. And the staff and the police need to have confidence, as do the community. But it needs a thorough overhaul of the Met's operations, not just in terms of the conduct, which is alluded to by Baroness Casey.
Thank you. So Andy, I guess we've been speaking about black communities externally. Can you tell us a bit more about how bad it is for the black officers, Asian officers and staff inside policing and what that relationship is like?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like, is that working, that one? Yeah. I think so. The one thing that I would say is, you know, if you ever wanted that evidence around the fact that policing and the Metropolitan Police in general are institutionally racist, you just have to look at the internal culture. A lot of the discussions that we've had in the last couple of years has centred around the external environment, around police use of powers, stop and search, use of force, handcuffs, taser. You look at the internal environment, you are less likely to be recruited in the first place if you're black. You're more likely, to leave policing early in your first 4 years of service if you're black, Asian or from another minority ethnic background. You're less likely to get promoted. The Casey Review has now told us what we have been saying for a number of years, that there is the racial disparity in the misconduct system. So when we do raise issues of bullying, harassment, discrimination, they are less likely to be found in our favour. Our members seek justice all the time. They are victims of racism, not on a daily basis, but they are all too often victims, and they need to see justice as well. That internal environment can be as toxic as the external environment, and I think we need to have that focus. We support so many members that are suffering trauma that all they want is their hurt acknowledged. They want their hurt acknowledged, and they want to make sure that it doesn't happen to somebody else. We are empowering people to display bullying and discriminatory behaviours. We are allowing them to get away with it, and they are continuing. Some even get promoted while they have complaints against them. So this is why we need that external scrutiny over our internal misconduct system. 20 plus years ago, we used to look after public complaints. So when you as a community made a complaint to us, we looked after it ourselves. The IPCC, The IOPC had to be brought in, and there are a number of issues obviously with that as well. But we need now something similar for internal misconduct. We need to make sure that the internal procedural justice has external scrutiny from you as community members, but also an external body which is going to hold police leaders to account around these issues.
Thank you. So, Abby, I guess for you, you straddle both camps in terms of community aspect and internally. How do you get 43 chief constables, mainly white, at the top of their game to have one view around systemic bias, systemic racism, however you, how are you going to achieve that?
Okay, no pressure. Well, I mean, I guess the first thing is my board's role actually isn't to do that.
Okay.
It's not to get the 43 police chiefs to come on side in terms of admitting systemic racism. My board's role is to scrutinise their implementation of the race action plan. The person who has the kind of portfolio and the responsibility for delivery of the race action plan, those are the people who are on the police side of things. So that's the kind of question that needs to be pushed to the CEO, the chair of the College of Policing, the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. They are the people who got their heads together and decided to implement the race action plan in the first place. Then you look at people who are like the programme coordinator, that's Deputy Chief Commissioner Tyrone Joyce, and we ask him, what are you doing to bring these 43 police chiefs on side? And then I think the overall question to this is, why is there a difference in view if you are internal to policing or if you are external? Because first of all, that division is a false one, right? Because anyone who is a member of the police could just as easily become a victim of crime, a perpetrator of crime. The line between wearing that uniform, you know, when you have that uniform on, you may be on one side of things. As soon as you take that off, you're another black man driving a car, or you're another white guy who could easily be prosecuted for X, Y, or Z. So why should your opinion about solving the issues in policing vary depending on whether you are a member of the police or a member of the public? Because all members of the police are members of the public, and I think that's a line which has been forgotten. And I think that that's something that this review for me really highlighted, and I hope reminds people of as well. The fact that you put on that uniform as a black officer or as a woman or somebody with any sort of protected characteristic, any kind of sexual orientation, you are just as vulnerable as you were without it. If anything, you're even more of a target the more visible your protected characteristic is. And so you should want the police to change. But it highlights for us a separate issue. If the police can't sort this out internally, in the largest police force in the country, the most diverse police force in the country, how can you ask members of the public to trust that they will act accordingly when it comes to putting on that uniform and having the coercive powers, that change in terms of responsibility, that extra weight that that we afford them? How can we trust them to use those powers in a way that's proportionate and responsible when they can't even do it internally?
Lee.
Well, give her a round of applause. Give her a round of applause. Yes, Abby, thank you very much for that. Don't forget, hashtag APA Casey Review, hashtag systemic bias. So anything you see from here, let's pump it out there into the universe. So we've had our international guest, John Harrington, Commissioner John Harrington from Minnesota, not Missouri. I don't know why I got that stuck in my mind. And he was in the United Kingdom. He's here in London anyway, just fortuitously. And through our connections, we reached out. And I thought it'd be useful to hear from an African American what their view was on some of the issues they've heard here raised on the panel, and whether that resonates with your experience and your own journey. So please give him he's jet lagged, so give him a warm round of applause. Can we give him a mic? Is this working? Which one's working? Yeah, that one.
Well, I want to thank you for welcoming me to a community meeting, which is where I've spent most of my career. I started in policing in 1977, and it is fitting that I follow the barrister at the end of the table because I came into policing because in Minnesota, in order to have blacks join the police department, there had to be a court order.
What?
That has been the history of policing, and it bookends what I'm going to say is that consent decrees and court orders have in fact been some of the most effective tactics in bringing both diversity to the police department and addressing cultural issues within the police department. Now, I will start by saying that it is wonderful to see this many faces that look like me. That's not what I see in Minnesota. We're a very small fraction of the state of Minnesota, and your accent for the, by God, you betcha, is Fargo-esque. I appreciate that. So, but to say that despite the fact that we are a small minority in Minnesota, it has not stopped us, and my partner in crime here is Brooke Blakey, who is the Director of Community Safety for the City of St. Paul. Brooke worked with me when I was running the regional transportation police system, and to give you an idea of the changes that we made there, when we started, there were 5% of the police department was people of color and women, and by the time Brooke and I left, we were at 50% of the department was people of color and women. And that makes a difference, by the way. There was a night that I remember very, very well where we had hired a significant number of Somali individuals. And we had a night where one day the roll call, which had usually been 100% white, was 4 Somali officers and a Somali supervisor and a Somali manager who were running the shift for the department. That level of diversification of the department changes the culture. The jokes that would have been told at that table 5 years prior to that no longer look as funny when you look at the audience around the room and you go, I don't think any of them are going to think my racist, homophobic statements are going to be treated with humor. So the diversification of the department, I think, is important, but also it's not a matter of just bringing folks in at the ground level. It's a matter of making sure that they are promoted throughout the system because you need folks at literally every level within the department. One of the ways that we brought that diversity and that I think was successful is we engaged on a process that in fact has its home here. One of my assistant chiefs, Dr. Matt Bostrom, who attended Oxford and got his doctorate from Oxford, he pioneered an approach that he called character-based hiring. And the theory behind that, and I think it has been interesting to see how it's worked in the real world, is I can train you to be a cop. But I can't train you to be a person of good character. And that if I hire people of bad character, I will train them to be cops, and they'll still act in a bad way. One of the interesting research, and he's got his doctorate, so everything's about the numbers, is that once he put that into place, diversity in the department went up, sick time went down, internal affairs complaints went down, use of force complaints went down. With no appreciable decline in crime rates or any other of the effectiveness measures. And so I'm a big believer in character-based policing as a model that I think both looks at the right things on the right end and it has the right effects. Now, as I said, one of the strategies that I think has been effective in Minnesota is one that I'm also actually very involved in right now, and that is, once again, a consent decree. I would assume that everybody in the world knows about George Floyd. So the Minneapolis Police Department and the officer who murdered George Floyd were investigated by my agency, and in fact, we had one of the officers plead guilty today. At the same time that we were prosecuting them on a criminal case, our Department of Human Rights brought a pattern and practice case against the police department and has found systemic racism within the Minneapolis Police Department. we are now in the process, and it is a process, and Barrister would understand this, and probably everybody on this panel would understand this, is the consent decree that will now come out of that needs to speak to not just policy, but it needs to speak to long-term remedies that will, in fact, change the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department and not just deal with the Band-Aid surface issues. And the statement that we talk about oftentimes in management is that culture eats policy for lunch, okay? Because you can have all the right rules, and I've watched Minneapolis post lots and lots of right rules, and I continue to see the behavior be abhorrent. And so what we recognize there is that the consent decree may, in fact, give us an opportunity to change the culture of the department. Because one of the beauties of a consent decree is that it is not the department leading the consent decree. It is the courts and it is the community. They will set the standards for what that department has to look like. And it is also, a fiscal document which says, you can say, well, I don't have any money to recruit the right people in my department. And the courts will say, well, you better find the money because this is a federal court decree that is going to decree that you will do this or your city goes into receivership. So having the courts as an outside player in this, I think, makes a huge amount of difference. It also makes, and I've seen this happen in many other departments, it also sets up a system of accountability where you have external players who are holding the officers and the management team accountable. It is not lost on me that while we held George Floyd and his colleagues criminally accountable for the death, Derek Chauvin and his colleagues for the death of George Floyd, no one at the senior level of MPD has ever been held accountable for the culture of the department that spawned that, that allowed an officer with 13 internal affairs complaints, many of them for excessive force, to continue to be a training officer and to act with impunity. So bringing in an outside accountability group, I think also may in fact be a response here. The last piece I'll note is I really appreciate the flyer about the march. One of the first things I did when I took over as the Commissioner of Public Safety in Minnesota, for the record, not Missouri, was that the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, and I convened a body together to do a data-driven, community-based study on deadly force. Why are so many of the young men, and it's mostly young men in Minnesota, mostly Native American, African American, and Latino young men killed by police? And it struck me, it resonated with me here. We were able to do that. My governor supported that. The Attorney General supported that. We were able to do a year-long study all over the state of Minnesota, ask that question, and bring community organizations, many of which have not been terribly fond of the police, to get their voices heard on the record about what do they think we should do. Having them given that opportunity, but one of the aha moments I had, and I'll close with this, really speaks to the whole issue of wellness. I remember sitting in a room and being shocked as we had several widows and moms of young men who had died at the hands of police say to us, we're not saying we don't want police. What we're saying is we want good police, we want healthy police. And I think that speaks to that whole character-based issue of it is not a matter of not having police, because I think most of us live in a world where policing is necessary. But we all should expect the finest character and values that policing can bring to the table. So I'm delighted to be here with you. It has been interesting. I got a chance to read the review. Your numbers are frankly shocking to someone who has had no real experience with the UK at all. So I am interested in learning more, and that's in fact why I'm here, is to try and learn more about policing as a system that polices an entire country, as I'm trying to just police an entire state. Thank you.
No, you're going to have to do better than that. I thought that was an outstanding contribution. Please. Thank you. Look, we do have some apologies to make. Yolanda Lear from Hackney can't be with us. She's hurt her back, so we send love and best wishes to Yolanda. The editor of The Voice, Lester Holloway, is lost in the metaverse somewhere between here and Watford, and sends his apologies. He was supposed to be here also. And an apology from me, because we ran interference with the Commissioner's office, suggesting that he not responded to an email in relation to an invitation to attend tonight. And in fact, he had just been squirted into my junk box. So I'd like to apologise to the Commissioner and the Commissioner's office for wrongly suggesting he hadn't supplied that email. But he's not here in any event. And I think we've got, out of the two Commissioners, probably the better one sat at the end of the table right here. Would you agree with that point? All right, okay. So we're going to move straight on. We're going to open it up for questions. We'll take them in groups of 3, and then we'll come to the panel, and you may indicate and say what it is you'd like to ask. So could I have somebody to come and help with the mic? Shall we give them one of our mics, Theo, or how's that work? Yeah. Okay, we'll start at the front, and we'll work our way. You can start there. You can start there. Janet?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
This lady in the yellow will do the microphones for you. Okay, cool. So we'll take them in groups of 3, and then you can respond.
Thank you. My question actually is in several parts. One is tie-up, and I haven't read the report, so I do apologize. Can you hear me better?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me better? Thank you. Sorry, my name's Zi Neal, and I have kind of in parts on the question, is that I've not read the report, so I apologise. I have seen snippets about it, and one of the things that seem to have quite a line through is disability. Many of people that are dying in police custody are either through some form of disability or long-term health condition, as well as one recently where somebody was saying they couldn't breathe, were feeling ill, and the police decided that they were making it up, and they actually died, and they were having an asthma attack. In terms of mental health, people, many of the black men and young people who are in crisis are actually going through our hands of our police. So disability is one of them. And the other is in terms of, and I find it really interesting, the person who's speaking about Minnesota, because there's a police culture about family, their family. And I would like to kind of pick up from what you were saying, is that if you're in the police force when you've got a uniform on, but you're not in the police force when you don't have the uniform on. But I think we've taken up the American system and history. That's where a lot of our training over the last 10, 15 years came from. We sent huge numbers of people over to America to train to police here. And that's the thing that I'd like the answer to the question, because I'm actually quite concerned as a member of the public that if police are injured or whatever, and I think that's appalling, but it's actually a greater issue than if it happens to the members of the public and members of our communities.
Thank you. My name's Jake Ferguson. I work with Timmy and others at the Black Equity Organisation. I've got 2 very succinct questions. First of all, I'd like to thank Lee, Janet and the panel for coming out on a Monday night talking about this really important report. Please continue to consult with us. 2 questions. My first question is probably the $1 million question in that, you know, how confident are the panel that the new commissioner will respond and implement change within the Met. I've watched his video to his rank and file, and if you saw the video, you think, well, zero tolerance attitude towards racism, homophobia, ableism, and so on. Welcome it. Go for it. You have our backing. But we know that previous commissioners haven't necessarily delivered. So I'm interested in the panel's views on whether they think Sir Mark Rowley's going to do a good job. Second one is obviously this culture, this sort of boys' club culture of protecting each other over decades has allowed sexism, racism, misogyny to fester. And I'm always interested in how the Police Federation, which represents 130-odd thousand serving officers, responds to diktats from their superiors about their behaviour and attitude. Does the panel have any evidence about how the Police Federation is responding to the Casey report? Because they represent the largest sort of group of officers in the country and therefore have a lot of influence, I think, on how their fellow colleagues behave.
Right, good evening everyone. My name's Jennifer Harris. I think my question to the panel is more to do with the historical context of policing, in that they started off as peelers, beaters and slave catchers, and we seem to be surprised that they have an attitude towards black people, gay people, etc., and they seem to be averse to any kind of training, because for the reason that I think it is that all of their behavior has been written off and co-signed by each government. Each government has reinforced and given them oxygen to behave the way that they do. So it's really, like the gentleman from America mentioned, it's about training about their attitudes. Because they're above the law, because they're not challenged on when they do something wrong, when they kill somebody or any kind of judicial review, they rise above it because the government of this country always co-signs it and allows them to get away with murder, literally. So how can we move forward from that?
Okay. Is this mic on? Is it on? Hello? Yeah. 1, 2. Hello? 1, 2.
Hello? Try this one.
Can I say, I did invite the Police Federation, but the only black person they employ who happens to be their head of diversity is on holiday. And they thought, well, he's not here, so there's nobody here that can answer your questions, Lee. So I did invite them because obviously the Police Federation have been voting against the kind of policies we've all been arguing for decades, and they've routinely voted against them. So I did invite them. I thought it was important for them to be here. But we'll hand over to the panel. Who wants to respond? Just remind them again.
My name's Jackie Dyer, and I kind of want to respond in a way to a couple of the questions. One which is around people dying in police custody who have disabilities, particularly mental health challenges. And the reason why Black Thrive was born in Lambeth was because of the death of Sean Rigg, who was is most vulnerable, having a mental health challenge at the time, and received that treatment which led to his death from the police. The same happened again inside the hospital, the local mental health hospital, with Olaseni Lewis, who once again died with excessive use of restraint or force. So there's something very much embedded in the psychology, in the attitude, in the way that our people are viewed as non-human. Therefore, you treat them differently. And so, for me, the point being made around character and values and attitudes is something that we need to bring much more to the surface, because if you are a policeman, you are there with the consent of the public to treat people with humanity and in the course of keeping everybody safe and providing security. Some people safe and the others you treat as rubbish, right? So for me, there are multiple ways that we have to deal with this issue, because it has been so long-standing. There have been many recommendations, quite right they are, but how do we build them? How do we make sure that they are sustained, that they are implemented going forward? And that requires all hands on deck, which is why it's so great that so many of you are in this room today. But this is a sustained journey, and I know many are already on this journey and been on this journey and will continue to be on this journey until we see the level of transformation that is required for us to have a different narrative in terms of how we experience the police force. And for me, that has to happen in our lifetime, not the lifetime after, not the same story over and over. Our children's telling the same story. Is the story over now. The story has to change. And I believe that we are the body of people who are here to make that happen. And so there has to be multiple ways that we do this. It's not just a one way. It's like by any means necessary. Okay, it's like that. So let me just offer a couple of things that in terms of what my leadership on the matter, along with all these my peers here and yourself in the room as fellow leadership on this matter. So when we think about the death in police custody that happens when you have a mental health challenge, one of the things that we brought into national law was the review of the Mental Health Act. I was involved in that and made sure that there was a recommendation within that mental health law that led to the patient and carer race equality framework. That now is a race equity accountability framework that is applied, that is going to be mandatory come the next financial year across all mental health trusts across the country. That means that every mental health service provision has to show how it's operating in an anti-racist way in the delivery of its services, in partnership with its communities that it's serving. Predominantly across the country, it's mainly black people that are getting the worst experience. So no doubt that's going to be a priority. And they need to demonstrate co-producing, co-working in partnership with racialized communities, services that better respond to the needs of racialized communities. That is going to be mandatory, and that our communities now have the opportunity to see that transparently across the country, for every region of the country, about what they are actually doing. It's no longer secret behind the doors, and they need to be doing it with us. So that's one thing. So what I'm saying is there are opportunities to advance the agenda by holding the system more accountable, and we can weave that in. The other opportunity, and I know it's working, because I'm making sure that it's working, because I'm driving to make sure that our voices are actually heard and that this system of accountability is embedded. It's hard work, but knowing that I've got all our people working with us, then it's going to happen. It has to happen, and it is happening. Another opportunity is that we can feed into the consultation that Black Thrive Global has been commissioned by Mopac, along with a company called a digital company, they're in the room, to do a consultation into the current methods of scrutiny and accountability. We know these don't work, and we know why they don't work. But what we have to do is identify, specify what are the solutions that we need going forward. We know why the state of the play, but what I'm asking you to do, along with my colleagues here, is specify what are the solutions going forward. And we've heard some from our colleague here in Minnesota. Yes. I got it right. You know, so in Minnesota, yeah, in terms of the court decree. What was it, that decree? consent decree, we can learn from these things. Yes, about around what some of the solutions might be. I would ask you to go online, hashtag Black Voices on Policing. You'll find the survey there, the call for evidence. I'm looking for everybody to contribute to that. The more voices that we have contributing to that, and it's particularly important that the APA, for example, and other bodies make a very rigorous, robust contribution from a black-led perspective, as well as individuals, to help us to identify and specify what needs to take place, and then we will make sure that it gets put into place.
I'll kick in on the culture question. I think it's probably the one that sits with myself. Policing culture can be reasonably unique. What we generally do with recruitment is we ask everybody, we ask people to come from diverse backgrounds, we ask them to bring their whole selves to work. Whenever they get in the door, then we work for about 20 weeks trying to turn you into a police officer. Part of that changing you into a police officer makes you conform to certain ways, the systems, processes. So that's why it's very difficult whenever you do speak out. I am often seen as disloyal to my colleagues because I happen to speak out whenever I see racism and injustice. For me, that should be every police officer's responsibility. I joined policing. I joined policing because I wanted to stand up for those that couldn't stand up for themselves. Wearing that uniform, carrying that badge is a privilege, not a right of some. And I think the thing that we need to understand is that privilege is about looking after people that can't look after themselves, protecting the vulnerable in the community. That's what a police officer's job is. It isn't to just enforce the law, it's to work with people to prevent harm, to make sure that people are safe, to look at the public safety approach that the guy from Minnesota is chatting about. Culture in policing needs to change, and it needs to change right now. To touch on the Federation, it's always a delicate issue whenever I speak about the Federation. All I'll say around that is the National Black Police Association would not exist if the Federation, the Superintendents Association, were doing their job. We exist because we are not always supported in policing. We are not always given the additional tools and the legal support that we need to do to take people and hold them accountable. Unfortunately, we have to go through that long and painful process and go into an industrial tribunal because we do not get that justice internally. That policing culture is often dismissive. It's often defensive. We are taught whenever we come in to justify our position, to justify our use of force, to justify the decisions we make, and all too often we get caught up in justifying rather than listening. And I think that's the key thing that policing, particularly here in London, needs to do now, is listen. The Federation are part of that as well, and it was good to see that they accepted the Casey Review's findings. We do need to look back at history when they did make representations around the Race Relations Act. Their chair in the past, after the riots here in Brixton, did justify the use of the N-word and that it shouldn't prevent you from being a police officer. Coming up recently, they refused to sponsor our conference, citing a lack of funds. There's this consistent push. If they would get on board, if they would understand that they not only have to police the majority, they also have to police the minority. 8.2% or 8.4% of the police service are currently from black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. That's about 1.3% across the board. And that's across England and Wales. I think it's about 5.5%. Is that right, in London? Compared to 13% at the last census. That has moved from about 3% 20 years ago to 8.5% now. It's moved about 2.5% since the police uplift programme, but we are seeing more black and Asian officers leaving than we are white colleagues because the environment is not safe, it's not secure, and it doesn't allow you to be yourself within policing. That's the bit that needs to change. Culture needs to have people held to account. It has to empower our colleagues to actually speak up whenever they see racism, misogyny and discrimination. If we have enough people that actually challenge it at its lowest levels, then we won't see it at its higher forms, and that's not just in the internal environment but also the external environment. So culture definitely needs to change. And speaking again to the consent decree and things like that, as I said, I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. I policed through the big changes that we've seen in Northern Ireland. I agree that policing does not move without that external scrutiny. It doesn't move without legislative reform, and I think we're at the point in London that that needs to come in. Northern Ireland had a reckoning for sectarianism. I think policing here in London, in Great Britain, across the board, need to have that same reckoning. We need to bring in legislative responses, and in Northern Ireland we did bring it in for Catholic communities. But what I will say around that, even whenever we have that legislative requirement for our Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities in Belfast, they do not have the same protection. And because it isn't a legal responsibility for us to look after them in the same way we do our Protestant or Catholic communities, they are left open. We were the only police service in the UK that policed the Black Lives Matter protest back in June 2020. We gave out over 70 fines and prosecuted the organisers under the Serious Organised Crime Act. Only police service in the UK to do so, and we're the only ones at this minute in time not to have an active race action plan developed. So there's a lot of things that still have to come, and that is with us having legislative framework. We had the policing board set up at a strategic level, which brought in politicians from our Protestant Catholic communities. We have volunteers from those communities as well. The key thing, I think, which really made Northern Ireland different was we had that at a local level as well, through police and community safety partnerships. That meant that people from communities like yourselves could reach out and ring the superintendent, ring the chief inspector, and they had to stand before all of yous in a legislative framework to explain what their officers had just done and explain to you what had just happened within there. So that I think gives a real local kind of flavour to it. And again, I had a hate crime reported to me. Somebody shouted sectarian abuse as they were driving past this Orange Hall. As they were coming through, that was reported to me through a superintendent who rung me as the sergeant. I took a car off the road to deal with that. We hear about young black females about to be thrown over a bridge in Belfast, and that was not reported because there is not the same framework. So we need legislative change, we need that drive from the external, and we need to make sure that community scrutiny and accountability is built in at every part of the system.
I totally agree with the point made about the Police Federation. You do feel when you listen to the Police Federation in the media that their sole purpose is to defend the police service and deny any form of racism exists whatsoever. So it'd be good if the Police Federation, as has just been set out, are proactive, embrace this report and accept that change needs to happen urgently. I think there's a statement in the report and it says, line managers and supervisors are warning staff against taking misconduct action so that the view that nothing happens is institutionalized. So the report sets out there are between 2013 and 2022, 19,000 allegations, 10,000 cases involving 13,000 officers and staff. One more little quote. 20% of the officers in the misconduct system have been involved in 2 or more cases, but less than 1% have been dismissed. So it seems to me that I think even the Commissioner himself acknowledged, admitted, there are hundreds of officers that need to be dismissed urgently if we're going to transform the culture. Because unless that happens, the culture in relation to disability won't change. I've been on a Met external advisory board for about 8 years as a critical friend. How long? 8 years. So clearly I've been successful, haven't I? But it's a critical friend role, it's unpaid, and I can see all of the interventions the Met has done over the last 8 or 10 years. And there's been interventions around disability. I think there are issues about disclosing disability in the Met culture, because you may not be supported if you do disclose you've got a disability, and therefore you may find your careers comes to an abrupt end. But I think there's been lots of things, as you've mentioned, about training, and there've been lots of inputs into the training. But clearly, as John said in America, it's more than training, it's about the whole culture and the character of people that we recruit. And they must be sifted out, the ones who have got racist, sexist, misogynist and homophobic tendencies and don't support disabled people. So I think there's much to be done. Am I confident about the new Commissioner? I think the Casey document has set out some very specific things that need to happen and happen urgently. Actions speak louder than words. I think ultimately, when we can see people being dismissed quickly, I mean, it takes years to get these cases to be heard. I mean, by that time, has anyone got the will to carry on? And we all know, mentioning mental health, if you do take a case in the Met or any organisation, it's a very heavy toll on your mental health, isn't it? A very heavy toll. So this creates more mental health and issues for staff and officers if it's not tackled quickly and effectively. So I think we all can see what needs to happen. Some of us have been saying this for many, many years, but here's the evidence. We've got, a Baroness has put the spotlight on this again. So we don't want to be here in 5 or 10 years again with another report saying nothing's changed. So we've got to hold the Met to account. My original point was, in terms of the black community and young black people, what does that actually mean in practice? And I'd welcome your thoughts about that. We've all got, process ideas, scrutiny panels. Do they work? Is there any democratic accountability? We've got examples, but the whole point of APA is to help put in place with our communities better systems of accountability that are resourced properly and we've got confidence and faith in.
Guys, I'll be very quick because I think a lot of the points have been covered already. I wanted to just address two of the questions. The one which came from Jake around how confident am I that the new commissioner will respond to the Met issues that are raised in the review. I think only time will tell. I think what is good is to have a new commissioner at this point, because I think what that does is it gives them a blank slate at which they can start, and it's easier to push forward reform when you individually don't have to accept responsibility for having overseen what had happened before you. So I think it gives them an opportunity to be really bold and to be kind of transformational in a way that we didn't see with the previous leadership. Andy and I had an opportunity prior to coming here today to actually have a meeting with Sir Mark Rowley and with Lynn Owens, his number 2. And I would say that the tenure of that meeting was completely different to the rhetoric that we heard from Cressida Dick. There was much more open discussion around the need for reform. There was an embracing of the fact that the changes need to be systemic. But, like I said, time will tell. And I think it's easier to put that forward when there is a push to do so. So, for example, the review has come out. All of the scandals which have come out back to back, the circumstances in which Cressida Dick was pushed out of the police, mean that I don't really see that they would have any legitimacy in their positions if they didn't embrace that. The test will be what will happen a year or two down the road when that momentum starts to wane, when they have to consider their positions, when they get more and more pressure from the institution that is the police. Will they continue to do that? Will they maintain and keep up that energy? And that's what I will be looking for, as somebody who's interested both in anti-racism work but also who is a London resident. And the question to the lady at the back who was asking about the dynamics of disability and the aspect of things, and I think what you raised is a really important point. I think that very often as members of black communities, we can fall into the trap of treating ourselves like a single community, like a monolith. We can treat ourselves as though there is one reaction that we have to things. We fall into the habit of ostracizing others along the same lines that society does. It can be easy for us to forget that there are black women. There are black people who suffer with disabilities. There are black people who have multiple disadvantage. And when we occupy spaces, we need to think about what areas and what other characteristics we need to recognise within our communities and make sure that the solutions include them as well. So I'm really glad that you raised those points. And just to go to your latter comment, which was around why is it that if police officers are injured, it's a greater issue than when it happens to members of the public? Well, I think there's kind of public status questions around that, aren't there? There's a protection of an institution. So if a person is murdered, the starting point for a murder of a police officer is higher than the starting point for a sentence for a murder of an ordinary person. There are practical reasons for that, which is you need to demonstrate that the police will be better protected, so there's a deterrent effect to prevent members of the public from attacking them, particularly because they are trusted to use certain powers, but at the same time it feeds into this idea that their lives are worth more than those who don't wear those uniforms. So again, that's something that we need to see sensitivity towards. We need to see the prioritising of looking after the vulnerable members of our society. So I really admire you for bringing forward those questions, and I think that brings in an angle that we definitely need to make sure we keep alive to when we're looking at solutions and areas that we even raise as issues as communities.
Thank you. Quality food from the panel. I'm going to come to Donna, I'm going to come to John, and I'm going to look for one more third at the back. Yes, the young lady at the back. Then we'll do another round of three. Now, can I just say, if each individual asks 3 questions, slightly unfair, because we'll be here forever with people answering them. So if you could try and keep it tight. Can I, before you just come on, Donna, can I just say about the APA, which we've not said a lot about. So the Alliance for Police Accountability is a new organisation founded out of Black Men for Change, a black men's network that is contributed by people like Jake and Jeremy. People are not here. Viva Moon, Jermaine Jackman is currently the chair of Black Men for Change. And out of that came the Alliance for Police Accountability Initiative. What that initiative is about is for people like me who've been struggling to try and get policing reform for 30, 40 years. And we've had various periods of success and failure. A bit like the stock market, you know, it goes up and down depending on who's in charge. There have been better times, there have been worse times. And so what we want to do is go to each city, Cardiff, 5 cities in England and Wales, and we're going to consult black communities about the construction of a 21st century black policing charter. We're not having the police in the room, we're not having the local authorities in the room. There's going to be a conversation amongst communities about how we construct what a policing charter looks like. Because as everybody says on this panel, there's 2 things that are a permanent reality: black communities and police. Those 2 are permanent fixtures on our landscape. So we have to think to ourselves, not what I would want. I've got my own ideas about what should be policing reform. But when has anybody ever gone and spent the time to talk to black communities to really find out, to make sure that black disabled people are in the conversation, to make sure that black, lesbian and gay people are in the conversation? That's why the APA has already invited a disability specialist, a young black man, Tam Boye, in a chair to be part of the steering group, and black and black lesbian and gay organisation to be part of the steering group, because we want a full conversation with the black community, not a partial conversation. And a lot of people will talk to you about what the black communities want, but how many people have taken the time to go and do the deep work? And I'm not talking about instant solutions. There is no instant solution to this problem. There is only deep work, ethical consultation, resourcing communities who have got no resources, enabling them to be part of that conversation. The other question that we will ask is, what is our responsibility for serious violence? Because there are 2 questions in relation to policing. You may want a reduction in stop and search. That's a conclusion we may come to. But then we have to ask the question, how do we tackle violence in our communities? And I'm not talking about what the police do in relation to violence, or the school does, or, you know, the teacher does. What I'm talking about is, what is the Afro-Caribbean community's personal responsibility to do what it can with the resources it has to reduce violence? And here I'm not just talking about teenage violence. I'm talking about domestic violence, where black women see themselves murdered by their former or ex-partners. The abuse that young women and girls of sexual violence that happens. The children who see domestic violence in their home. You know, we do deep work with young people on council estates, and we talk to them, and I talk to youth groups of young black men. They're often pained by the relationship with their father. But I remember one who said to me, the first person I wanted to kill, uncle, that's what they call me now, I'm an old man. The first person I wanted to kill, uncle, was a black man. And it was a black man who was the boyfriend of his mother, and he saw her being beaten by this guy, and he was only 10, 11, and he's thinking, well, his first hateful figure in his life is this person. And what I'm showing you is 30% of domestic violence murders happen in front of children. right? And black and ethnic minority women are overrepresented in those figures. So if we're going to deal with issues of policing and violence, then we have to take these two issues seriously. It's a 3-year project. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be slow work. It's going to be in the 5 cities, but it's going to be informed by what Abby does, by what Jackie does, by what Jeremy and NBPA do. Because all of that is good food to feed into the process. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for doing the work in the community. Are you listening to the old man? Are you sure? All right, we're going to pass over to Janet. It's going to take 3 more questions.
So I think we had someone... Oh, sorry, Donna, you've got the mic, so go for it. Donna and then yeah.
I'm really encouraged to hear what you said, Uncle Lee, because that was going to be my question to the panel. Because as somebody who sits on the New Met Commissioners Transformation Board, I think it's important to be transparent in these community spaces. I just want to make it clear that there's no brown girl in the ring there. And I'm using my voice to hold to account what I see when I'm attending there. I'm also a person who trains South Area BCU, so that's Sutton, Croydon and Bromley. I train the newly recruited officers there. I know they're called inputs, but I really try, because as a professional, I'm an EDI consultant, so I really try and lay down that de-escalation, that understanding of culture. And I'm telling the room, the average age is 23, and nobody lives within the M25. Exactly. When you ask them, when I'm asking them about the Brixton riots, it's many of the things that we would point to as markers, definitive markers in local social history of where the relationship between the black community predominantly, but not just the black community, as we've heard, disabled communities, trans communities, they don't know what I'm talking about. They have no idea of the London that they are coming to police because they just don't have that lived experience. And around diversity, they don't. Last week I was training them and I said, oh, you know, one of the benefits, because I always think with my belly, is about having, you know, different foods on Uber Eats. And they were like, well, where I live is just fish and chips and a kebab. So I think it's important for the room to know sometimes. We have to give context. These police officers that are coming through the ranks are young, because nobody in London wants to join. They are many white. And you can see sometimes, even at that early stage, you see from those perhaps of Cypriot or you know, different, they're already feeling, they've shared feelings of, you know, boy, I understand, that was a really good delivery, Donna, because I'm already experiencing it. And that's at that newly recruited rate. My last thing was going to be to the panel, I think nights like this are really important, but how, I heard what you said, Uncle Lee, but how consistent are we going to be? Because the thing is, we are very reactionary by rote, yeah? Things happen to us and we all are meeting and we chant down Babylon, and then what happens after that? I think also the other thing I would have liked to see is young people in this room. I can't tell the last time I've been stopped, but I know, and we're in the heart of Brixton, there would have been a whole room full of young people who have that first-hand experience. Some of us, when we talk, we're harkening back to the 90s and 80s, and that's not a bad thing because it still goes on, but I think those young, fresh voices, Uncle Lee, need to be in conversations like this, streamed to the world so that they know that it's not something that we're making, oh, it's Lee again. No, it's real. This is the transgenerational trauma that we endure. And I think having young people in the room is so essential to this kind of conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me. So my name's Georgie Dennis, and I work with Jackie Dyer and Black Thrive on the consultation that she mentioned about improving how communities can hold the police accountable for their actions. I was looking at the Casey report, analytical report, and I just wanted to read something. This is some of the evidence that the recommendations were based on, which says, officers and staff do not believe that action will be taken when concerns around conduct are raised. And last Saturday, me and our team that are delivering this consultation, we spoke to close to 75 community members in Brixton Village, and that was one of the concerns that they had. So many people said there's no point raising complaints about the police because they feel nothing will be done about it. So if the general public feel this way, and if officers and staff feel this way, who's responsible to making sure that this change happens? Because the people that we spoke to felt like it's going to be difficult to change. Thank you.
And do we have one more?
So I haven't read the report. My name is John Michelle, by the way. I haven't read the report. But what I did read was the letter, the accompanying letter that the Baroness sent. And one thing I noticed was she mentioned about decades of this has been happening for decades, basically, and it's a shame that this hasn't been dealt with over these, last 10, 20, 30 years. And that's been echoed here today, that this has been a systemic racism has been happening for decades. And I've noticed that throughout those decades, it's always been said that the police must change, the police must change. And I would argue in the next 5 years, we'll be saying the same thing, the police must change. Now, at what point are we going to tell ourselves that the police will not change? Once we get that in our mind that the police won't change, we have to now start thinking about what do we do now? Because if you've got a group of an organization that won't change, all you can do is hit them in the pocket. That's all you can do. So I'm saying we should be looking at restitution and reparations for those decades of false imprisonment, whole communities being targeted, deaths in custody, all the cases that have gone forward where people have complained about the police that have been thrown out. What are we going to do about all those people, those victims of all this systemic years of abuse and discrimination? So are we looking at reparations? Are we looking at financial restitution from the Met? Because I'm fed up of talking about the police going to change. They're not going to change. We can see that the country in itself is increasingly turning towards very, racist, right-wing, populist governments are coming all over Europe. Things are not going to change in the UK. So the only way you can deal with a beast that won't change is to hurt them. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah, back to the panel. Anybody want to take any of those questions? Off you go, Timmy.
I'll take one of those, particularly that question the gentleman here posed. And I think I hear what you're saying, that we've been saying something for many years, that the police won't change. At what point do you just accept that's the case? The Black Equity Organisation, we did some research over the last year where we talked to over 2,000 people across the UK. And one of the things that came out of that is that there is that general belief within the black community, not just about policing, but actually the institutions that should be supporting black communities are not doing the things that they are supposed to be doing. I'm a woman of faith. So this is, there's the BEO thing, there's all the stuff that we're talking about here. But also I am a woman of faith, and I do believe that holding the police to account has to be a strategic and, the chief cornerstone of the work that we continue to do as black organizations and the black community. As taxpayers, we pay for the police, and they have to police with our consent. So I think one of the things our research said is that, the black community is very resilient. We work with our own friends and families for the support that we need. Can you imagine the amount of extra psychological weight that is for us to continue to do that? So my thing is, I think we need to continue to hold the police to account. All the things that my colleagues here have talked about, we need to continue to do that and not give up. So that's just one thing, that's just my view there. And then the other thing around reparations, I work in the criminal justice system, and I've done so for about 13 years. And one of the things I see all the time in court is that they'll say, when they're sentencing, well, let's just make sure that whatever that drug is or whatever that money is, that's put aside somewhere. Where does that money go? And one of the things I was talking to Lee just before we started is around reparations. And some of those things, whether it goes to the Treasury or wherever it goes, we need to continue to work and raise the profile and say that money needs to be put into our communities. We're talking about the APA work around resourcing and making sure that we can do all of these charters and all this work. But it's got to be funded in some way. And I think what we need to do is repurpose that money and put it into our communities so that it's doing the good that the police, as you say, are not currently doing.
Anybody else in the panel?
By the way, John, do you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
London hospitality. I think I would be in the wrong job as a anti-racist organisation if I didn't believe we can change things, because I may as well just give up myself. We work with a lot of young people and children, and I've got children myself. I want them to be protected by the police properly. I want a decent system that treats people with respect and humanity. So we've got to keep on that. If we can't move the numbers of black officers from 4% to 13% in 5 years, something is not changing for sure. If all of these things get put right quickly, you would like to think we've got a better culture that's moving in the right direction. Lee is very right. Nothing is going to change overnight, clearly, but we must keep the pressure on, and we must have a better police service than we've got at the moment. Unfortunately, the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty is not working for us. It is not bringing public bodies to account on racism, and especially institutional racism. So I'd like to think BEO and all of us will talk to the government, either this government or the next government, about the legislation, because we do not have the same legislation as the States has, or a robust legal framework to challenge public bodies to do the right thing. So we must keep on that long-term objective, but at the same time, we must tackle the immediate. I think George's point is, when Cressida Dick was the commissioner, there was a surge in recruitment, and she dropped the residency requirement that you have to be based in London, live in London to join the London Police, the Met Police. It's now been re-adopted, but it shouldn't be dropped. Every time they need a few more thousand officers, it gets dropped. And then we have all these guys from outside London come who, as Donna says, or Georgie says, actually it was Donna, I think, talked about the training, do not know London communities and any history about London communities, particularly in relation to black communities. So all of those things have been well talked about, but we cannot, my message to the Commissioner is, do not drop the residency requirement at all. Stick with it. You've got to recruit Londoners to be in the Met Police if you want to change it. If we can get these things right, I'd like to think black officers, in particular Asian officers, will want to stay in the Met because they're taken seriously, they're listened to, and we get rid of the racists and misogynists in the police service.
I thought your question was a really interesting one, because what you were saying was, if I can, you weren't saying don't engage with work that challenges the police. You were saying we can't rely on the police to change to see these things happen. So what are we focusing on? Where should we put our energy? And I think that's a really poignant question, because previously these kind of solutions around police reform have always relied on the police themselves to adopt that change. But policing shouldn't be looked at in a vacuum. What we're seeing with policing is we've seen a competence creep, a mission creep in policing. We've seen the creep in terms of policing being called out when there's a mental health crisis. We see policing being called out to deal with the fallout of the rise in housing costs, the cost of living. We see more and more draconian powers being given to the police to deal with the fallout from austerity. And police has always been premised on that idea. It's always been around disorder and not really around crime prevention. It's been around maintaining peace, not really around the detection and prevention of criminality. That idea is actually very new, that import in terms of police. So my answer to that is this, that we have to recognise that the solution to the issues that we see in policing rest outside of policing. We have to see that what we want is we want a push for better housing, better employment, we want better settled immigration status, we want better access to welfare. When you look at the communities, and this is the rhetoric that they like to adopt when they talk about the issues that we have. They talk about black on black crime, they talk about this, they talk about that. But there's, we know that, first of all, crime is often committed along racial lines. That pattern is not something which is exclusive to black communities. But what does indicate rises in criminality or rises in these other factors is deprivation, is the idea that people are dehumanized in the first place, and therefore that crossing that line over to criminality can be easier, or that what is even labelled as criminality in the first place is guided by that public order aspect of things. So, for example, there's a new piece of legislation which is being brought through called the Public Order Bill. And I don't want to get too lawyerly and too technical, But what you can see is you can see the government pushing forward aspects in that bill which the House of Lords shut down for the Police and Crime Sentencing Courts Bill. And there are things in there, like the introduction of civil orders, which would prevent you from being able to cross over a road if you're subject to an exclusion zone. And if you were to do so while you're subject to one of those orders, you could be put in prison for up to 2 years, for example. So it creates an individualised criminality that you don't see in other areas. So what I think I would like to see is I would like to see black community members feeling more empowered to push back against that mission creep. I would like to see us more involved in terms of politics, pushing for MPs that actually don't just sit in safe seats and then rise to certain positions because of where they are, but actually take on our causes. And I'd like to see us represented in the Labour Party in a way that actually prioritises the things that affect us as black communities, rather than just lazily counting upon our vote because there's nothing that we're going to get from other parties. Those are the aspects, those are the things which are going to transform policing. And that's why it's really great to see groups like BEO and so on here who have that more holistic focus. But we as community members, we need to have channels available to us to allow us to do that. So I think your question was premised exactly correctly, which is we should actually approach this on the basis that the police will not change. We should continue to engage, but we should look for solutions outside of policing at the same time. You're 100% correct in that.
And exactly why that's what the APA is going to do. We're going to focus internally, build networks, consult, get the consensus necessary to do the biggest and most in-depth consultation with Afro-Caribbean communities on the issue of policing we've ever seen in the United Kingdom. And that's why it's a 3-year project. No instant solutions, slow work, dedicated work, building those networks. And in relation to Afro-Caribbean officers, I think the Afro-Caribbean officer national level is 2.4%, is it? And it's risen, it was 2.4% in 2000, and it's risen to 2.9% in 2022. So I'm talking about Afro-Caribbean officers here, not the full range, just Afro-Caribbean officers. So you've moved 0.5% in 22 years. Yeah, I think the black community is voting with its feet, at the same way that Andy spoke about officers leaving the service. So it's very important. And I think the other thing that is very important, and Janet is going to come to another 3 questions, so put your hands in the air. The other thing that is very important is that there has to be transparency, accountability. How many of you know who goes and speaks on our behalf to Scotland Yard? How many know what they're saying to Scotland Yard about what the black community wants for policing? How many of those people come back to you and tell you what it is they're doing at Scotland Yard? How many of them have got contracts with Scotland Yard? How many are being funded by Scotland Yard? The point that I'm making is that the police have got some work to do, but we've got some house tidying to do about transparency and accountability. Are you listening to the old man?
Yes, Uncle.
Okay. So that's where we're going to go. Janet, we're going to take 3 questions. The choice is yours.
I've got lady over in that far corner. I'll take the guy there, and I'll take the lady there. So, yeah, she's got the headband on.
Hi, I heard someone talk about repartitions and funding, and I was just thinking, we're still waiting for repayments for slavery and for the Windrush, which has taken over 3 years. So when we're talking about how we're going to get money from people that don't even support us in the community, I'm not sure how that's going to make sense. We talked about the new commissioner talking about he agrees with all of these people that should be sacked. And the question was asked, how are we going to hold him accountable? I don't recall hearing somebody say what kind of things we can put in place to hold him accountable. But what few things came to mind is that when we talk about pressure, because we do a lot of marching, and the thing for me is I always talk about marching and I join marches, but my peoples around me are always saying marching does nothing, so they're at home and don't do nothing. And I say to them, well, you're sitting at home isn't helping either. But the reality is the marching still isn't helping. So what else can we be doing? We be doing in August every year, we do a march to Parliament with a piece of paper and come back about repartitions. Still, we haven't had that. So I was just thinking, what about if we put pressure on Daly? We need to hold the new commissioner accountable for what his comments. He's made it clear that he acknowledges the atrocities that have taken place within his department. So what about putting the pressure on him to say, okay, what are you doing about this? And we need a response by this particular time. And if we don't get a response, this is what we're going to do. I don't know what we could do in a certain amount of time. I don't deal with I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what we could do within a certain time frame, but there has to be something. There definitely must be some policies that say if you don't get a response by a certain time in relation to certain questions that you ask, things that can happen. I was trying to write it down before you came to me, but you came to me before I got to finish what was being said. But that's all that I can say for now, because I can't remember the other thing that I was going to say. But
Thank you. That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of quick questions. First and foremost, you know, for me, this whole... Oh, gosh. Let me put on my glasses. Okay. Let me go back to my first question. My first question really is around this whole idea of racism. For me, it seems pretty clear that racism for the police is actually dropping down in the pecking order. You know, it's almost as though sexism, misogyny, anything else goes on top of that, and racism plays much, much lower in their accountability field. Secondly, I'm kind of concerned that we're still talking about changing police and policing, and not talking about how we actually hold them accountable. How do we hold their feet to the fire? You know, we can talk about accountability, but if we're not talking about processes or mechanisms that we're going to use to actually put that into effect, we're still more or less just going over and regurgitating the same old situations and stories that we've heard of years and years and years ago. Lee spoke earlier on about an organization, and I wanted to know who was actually going to fund that. I think he said you got 3 years. It's going to take 3 years to look into. I want to know who is going to fund that. But coming back to what my brother from America mentioned, for me, you know, I'm not an optimist by any means. Okay, I've been here long enough to see that the police mean to stay as they are, unless we do something to change that direction. So it comes down to, unless there is legislation that is actually enclosed, embodied, to actually change these people, to actually change the behavior, and it is connected locally to how we actually pay our taxes, I don't think we're going to see any changes. Okay? These people need to be taken into account, not only what they have and how their economies are nosediving, okay, because that's going to have an effect on us. And if you don't believe that, look at how Rishi came in, okay? And we know, you know, I'm concerned because when I hear someone on the panel say, how do we weed out the bad ones? The bloody institution is racist. Yeah. The country is racist. So how can you weed out 1 and 2s and 3s? Yeah? So, you know, it's not that we are not making progress when we talk about what we are doing, but they're holding accountability. They're holding their feet to the fire. Unless we talk about those kind of processes and how we as the public have oversight over those processes, okay? And in my opinion, we should be paid to be on those bodies, okay? We should be paid to be on those bodies, okay? We should be paid to be on those bodies, okay? Because these people, as far as I'm concerned, have done what they've done, and they will continue to do what they do as long as they can get away with it.
Thank you. And just the young lady over there, please.
Good night, everybody. My name is Rosemary Stacey Ramkisoon. You might have actually seen my face all over London. I was a part of the movement against xenophobia with Lee and Zita Hoban and all that. I've come here for solutions. I didn't come to ask questions. I have on my Freedom to Speak Up Guardian badge. I work for the NHS. I'm a mental health specialist nurse, and I work with learning disabilities with an autistic son. So I cover a lot of things, and his dad lives in London. So, lived experience. For the person who said there's no young people in the room, my 18-year-old autistic son sent me here today to ask a few questions and to give you a lived experience. At age 15 in Reading, where we live, me, his 9-year-old sister now, and him were on a bus. This woman came in the bus. It was normal. Then she was frantic, and she was asking everybody to look for their phone. She stopped at my son with a phone imprint on his trousers and said, "You have my phone, give it to me." I said, "Hell no, he is not going to take out his phone to show you that he's a thief. We don't live like that." All the people on the bus were supportive of this person and said to her, "Give me your phone number so it will ring, and we'll see if his pocket vibrates." Yeah? We get so upset, we leave the bus. The poor bus driver lets us out, and he also happened to be black. And she runs behind us, shouts at the bus driver, "You're letting the thieves leave the bus." So by this time, I have 2 tearful children. I say, "Call your father who lives in London because he behaves like a madman and he will come up here and murder people." Those were the words I used. Yes? At that point in time, he took out his phone for his reason, not to prove that he was guilty, but because he needed to take it out. That's what I teach my children. She ran into Nando's, and I said, "Hello, no, we're not doing this. You have caused us trauma. You are racist. You targeted my son. I need your number and your name," because I was just so stressed out at the time, I didn't take that number as well. The Nando's manager automatically asked me and my children to leave. Stop harassing the woman. It's about the culture. If we're naive that there's no racism, this is going to happen. LBC, is it? Right? That presenter should have hung up the phone on that caller, got the number, got the police to that house, and asked him to say that again. We have 9 protected characteristics. We need to know the law. We need to be strong. And each person has that power to make a change. We need to stop being naive. And I'm going to say unpalatable truths in this room. A lot of people who marry to white, a lot of people who mix race white, will use their privilege when we're not looking. We need to look after each other. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's move on.
All right. Who wants to tackle any of the questions first? Well, statements, as so. Off you go, Jeremy.
At the end of the day, we lost the last commissioner because the mayor intervened, if you might recall, and Cressida had to leave. So in terms of the Met Police and accountability, as far as I know, the Mayor of London has a big say and the Home Secretary has a big say. So the Mayor gets elected, the election in a couple of years' time. So in terms of democracy, we need to vote for a Mayor that is going to take action. I'm not saying Sadiq Khan is not taking action, but it's the Mayor that has a lot of power in this situation, along with the Home Secretary. So in terms of the democratic process, that's one process. We're here for ideas. So if people should be paid to be on certain boards, scrutiny panels, fine. Why not? There's a process, though, as Lee mentioned. How are those people accountable? I'm not paid. I advise the Met, but I'm not paid. I don't mind whatever way we work it and whatever levels of process we have. something needs to be put in place that's better than what we've got now. So let's look at all the ideas together and see what can work, and what we want to do, what the Met wants to do, what the Mayor can do, and so on and so forth. So I think that is really important. I do think, obviously, everybody needs to be able to take action against everyday racism. All those situations are all too common, unfortunately, for our children and young people in particular, and they're not supported. So, you know, unfortunately, we have got a major economic crisis, a social crisis. The services are probably going to be diminished. The youth services are going to be even under more likely to close down and not be available to support young people. And God knows what's going to happen to a lot of people in low and middle incomes in terms of being able to survive. So we are facing, as we're going to be told in the coming days, if we've not been told already, extremely difficult times, aren't we? All of these things are going to get probably much worse, as you've rightly said. So we've definitely got to find a better way of working together. As Leah said, the APA should be, we hope it will be funded by charitable trusts and not the police. So that's the intention as far as I understand. Lee's the chair, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. He's right. But that's what we want to do. We don't want it to be funded by the police. We do want to work with the authorities as and when necessary and have their input clearly, because we need to kind of influence the system, and we need to be informed by black officers who are in the system and outside the system, as well as obviously the community and young people.
I'll just chat to the is racism dropping down the agenda piece. So the National Police Chiefs Council that looks after all police services in the UK, they would say that the two priorities that they have at this minute is violence against women and girls and the Race Action Plan, which Abby sits as the chair for the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board. When we look at how much progress has been made around the violence against women and girls piece of work, we see lots of work and lots of services. We see lots of police leaders coming out and saying that they stand behind it. I've always said that that's because the leadership does not represent our membership, does not represent the communities like we see in the room here tonight. So they have a personal and an emotional attachment to the violence against women and girls piece. And the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council just before Christmas said that he had 2 young daughters that he wanted to protect. So this is this personal and emotional attachment they have. They don't all have black, Asian or other minority ethnic relatives or people that come around to their house all the time. They see often us, like the lady said in the corner, that we are often seen as the suspects. We are all often seen as people that need to be controlled rather than looking at us through a safeguarding or victim-led approach lens. Excuse me. One of the things that's happening, which maybe hasn't got the publicity that it has around race hate crime, and particularly around race hate, the reporting of non-crime race incidents. After the inquiry into Stephen Lawrence's racist murder, the report from Lord Macpherson, there was a bit around race hate crime that police services had to record it. We had to record crimes. So if there's a crime attached to it and there's a racial element, then we could racially aggravate a lot of the different crimes. But there was also an onus on us to actually record race hate incidents, which did not constitute crimes. There was a challenge to race hate incidents that weren't crimes. It was around a trans issue. It was an ex-police officer as well that brought it, and that brought around fundamental changes to what we're going to do. So it used to be that the perception of the police, the public, or any other person was enough for us to record it. Now that's changing to the police and the public. So it is, or the police and the that's going to be the sole arbiter around whether it's a race hate incident or not. That has a big impact about how we track and trace where race hate in the community lies, where those hotspots are, where we need to focus a lot of our attention. But it also limits then the protection that officers and staff have, that communities have from a race hate perspective. So there is a diminishing of people's rights at this minute in time, including around race hate. So that's an important factor to bear in mind. The bit this around accountability as well, I think the only way to deal with institutional or systemic racism is either to dismantle the system or to put checks and measures at every single part. I think the dismantling of a system is going to be difficult. It's probably not realistic to expect it, but what we can do is work together to put checks and measures from an MBPA perspective on the internal policing environment, from a community perspective, from the external environment, and that's not just on policing itself, that's in all parts of the system. So that's politicians, it's all of the other public bodies and representatives that you can push and that you can kind of try to drive to make sure that policing is held to account, because I agree, there is not going to be change. Policing will not move in this themselves. We need to make sure that there is external pressure and that pressure is continuous and it's long term.
Can I ask for like a show of hands? Can I just ask how many people here are a member of a political party? So not do you vote, but how many of you are actually a paid member of a political party? Okay, so let me just give you an example of London, and let's just think about the influence that London has on the national agenda. We have the Met Police Commissioner, and how many politicians do we have that cover the area of London? No? How many, like, if we think about the number of politicians and MPs that can apply pressure, if you think about the fact that we have a Conservative government, but London is overwhelmingly Labour, okay? But so few people here who are very highly motivated, the fact that you're here on a Monday evening, only 2 or 3 of you put your hand up to say that you are a member of a political party. So what influence do we as a community therefore have on the manifestos that we see which come through the mainstream political parties? Why is Labour so relaxed in terms of the priorities that it gives to proactively dealing with anti-black racism? This also means the fact that there's very little Labour membership in this room means that none of you have a say in who is going to replace Harriet Harman as the Labour candidate for Camberwell and Peckham. The same Camberwell and Peckham which has seen how many atrocities over the last few years at the hands of the police. The same Camberwell and Peckham that is so influenced and so covered by the worst of policing that we see that happens in this area. I'm not saying that we are a lazy community. We are not by any means. I'm not saying that these systems work for us. They don't. You know, I'm saying that actually in general systems don't, and I completely understand why so few of us are members of those things. But in terms of accountability, I think one of the difficulties is accountability in this country relies on people having time and energy to put it into those systems. And those systems don't work for us. They drain us, they exhaust us. We have the same conversations over and over again with the same people turning up to the events over and over again. But the mechanisms that are in place at the moment to hold the Met Commissioner to account are through the Mayor, who is elected, through MPs, whom we elect, and through independent advisory groups, which I'm going to be completely frank, I don't think are currently fit for purpose in the structure that they have right now. They need to be completely transformed. But those are, to answer your questions, those are the 3 areas, the 3 main areas to hold the Met Commissioner to account. But that takes us back to your question before, which is, well, we've got to accept the answer has to be outside of policing, because the methods which are within policing don't work. But at the same time, those structures which are outside of policing also don't work for us either. But we need to think about where we focus our energy. We need to move en masse. We need to maintain that. We need to be able to delegate authority to people who we trust to keep our points up on the agenda when we're not physically in those rooms at the same time. And that takes organisation. And that's something that we do really well. I actually think as a community, you know, all of our different cultures that come together, the things that we have in common are that we have a village mentality, that we look out for one another, that we see each other and we will step in when we need to. We need to never lose sight of that, because that's the way that we lose the strength that we have as communities. But those are the ways that we can hold the Met Commissioner to account. Currently, I don't think that those methods work, and I think that we need to organise and come up with solutions ourselves as well.
Thank you. We're going to come to Janet's going to do another audience. We're going to take John, but just before we do that, go ahead.
Do you want to say something? Do you want to say something?
Very briefly, because I really don't understand your system of government. So let me start out by there's Tories, Conservatives. I've got 2 parties that basically are 2 parts of the same coin. But what was resonating with me was when the Attorney General Keith Ellison and I did the Deadly Force Encounters Working Group. We came up with a list of legislative initiatives, sanctity of life, rules requiring officers to intervene if they saw another officer injuring, data reporting, funding for an external criminal justice group that would investigate police use of force, all of these different things. So we bring them to the legislature as our want. The governor is supportive of that. So leadership does make a difference in terms of who is the person that's pushing this. And we were at stalemate with no real progress. And one group that I have not heard mentioned here that was instrumental in breaking the logjam was the business community. The business community stepped up and basically said to both parties, no disrespect to either of them, you all depend on us for your contributions, for your campaigns. You depend on us for a lot of different things. And you will get this done, and you will get it done now. And I kind of was like, yeah, right. These are elected officials that have their election certificates. And within a week of that, we were at conference committee with a significant number of the proposals being actually discussed. I had leaders from both parties that were pushing for their own views of this, but the business community, in alliance with the electeds and in alliance with the community, really were a tipping group. They made a difference. And my suggestion is that is that's a part of the community that oftentimes gets left out because we think that they have a bottom line view of what is important, and they probably do. But having bad policing isn't good for the bottom line. And so that would be another group that I would suggest, respectfully, like I said, not knowing your political system, if that has any impact here or not, but it did have a significant impact back in Minnesota.
Brilliant, thank you. So a few more questions. I'll take yourself there in the plum-coloured jacket, yourself in the black T-shirt, and the guy with the afro behind.
Thank you very much. My name is Simeon Grosset. I'm from the Britain's Ethnic Minority Business Federation. And I listened earlier on to what this lady was saying about they were automatically assumed to be guilty on the bus by the bus driver and many of the people in that bus. And so, before I get into the real issue with Jeremy, the funny story was I was on a bus when I had a bit of an argument, and the bus driver asked me to get off. So I said I wouldn't get off. So he said, if you don't get off, I'm going to stop the bus. I said, fine. And he was upset with me, and people got upset with me as well. Then he said, okay, I'll call the police. We'll call the police right now. I'll wait for them. The interesting thing, the police came after about 15 minutes and actually said to me, well, yes, you are right, and the chap has got no right for you to force you to get off the bus, particularly at the bus stop. But we'd like you to do that to calm things down. They were asking me to break the law to satisfy an ignorant individual who didn't understand that what he was asking me to do was incorrect and illegal. The point is that they did it anyway, and the police officers got off the bus and gave me their details, and I reported it as unacceptable. Now, funny enough, the bus then broke down, he couldn't move. So I'm very happy about that. But taking the point with Jeremy, I really believe, Jeremy, that you've got to look at what the impact is. I think if people are serious, we don't need to back political parties. We say one of us will go and get 10 people to go to the mayor's office with Jeremy and say we're not happy with what's going on, and we will not vote for the Labour Party if they do not give us the protection we need. Forget all that rubbish and get the businesses to support it. We've done that before, and I'm suggesting that let's get some practical steps. I will absolutely support the argument. We get the mayor, who will react if it comes to votes, and I can say this 100%. In March last year, before the vote, before May, we applied from the organisation for £1.6 million. We were told we weren't going to get it, and I ran a housing association called Windrush Housing. We told him that if we didn't get that money, we're going to go and vote against him at the election. We got the grant, not because we were very good at what we wrote in, but we said, look, if we don't get that money, we're going to vote against you, and all the residents in the housing association will vote against you. In 50 hours, they passed an agreement to give us part of the money, and that money allowed for 70 small units to be given. All I'm saying, I think I agree with this gentleman here, you've got to take practical steps, and you've got to have things that have an impact on those people. Jeremy, I will be with you the next time you go to the office, the mayor office, and I'll be telling him bluntly, I'm voting his next person out if he doesn't give us some support.
Thank you. Yes, the guy in the T-shirt.
Hi. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to thank the panel for a really interesting evening. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, a lot of things have come up, and I think listening to Donna earlier, especially articulating just how little faith we can have in the police service and the people who are in charge of oversight of the police service, makes me think of the African proverb, the tree remembers, but the axe forgets. So the community remembers, but actually we've got a police service which is defensive, which is obstructive, which rejects everything that the community has experienced for generations. And especially given that we're here in Brixton, and we know that the history of Brixton, having lived in Tottenham, where I think you were a police officer.
I was here.
Oh, you were here, so okay. But anyway, but I think the key thing that hasn't come up yet is the concept, which I'd like to ask Abimbola and Jeremy and Andy about, is there ever going to be any movement on the concept of racial profiling? Because we need to talk about racial profiling. Yes, there's a range of issues why we have violence in our community. When you have young boys who are going through the types of issues that Lee described in their household, rather than having their problems addressed, they are made to be the problem. So a young black boy in London is 3 times more likely to be excluded from school, which means that he's on the streets, which means that he's already angry about the things that he's experiencing in his life, which means that the best place for his anger is to be in a gang and fight against other angry young kids who are police services, and Jackie, maybe our CAMS services, our children, adolescent mental health services, should be addressing. So when I work in criminal justice, when I've spoken to youth offending team managers, I ask, well, who's getting support from counsellors and psychologists? Because a lot of the children that you're working with have got very big issues with trauma. They've got trauma from the gangs. They're smoking copious amounts of weed, and it's not the type of weed that the elders used to smoke, but the weed that will really twist their minds, so we really need to get them into these services. And I'll never forget the lady said that the people who get CAMS provision in this borough are middle-class white girls with eating disorders, right? So that's something that we need to also think about. But coming back to the racial profiling, we know that a very small number of our young black boys are going through these issues and presenting with these issues, but the community as a whole is being targeted for stop and search, for enforcement. It's getting worse. The most worrying aspect of that is that not only is stop and search becoming more and more disproportionate, it's becoming more and more aggressive. So now it's for a young 14-year-old boy who hasn't committed a crime to be stopped, to be controlled, to be criminalized, to be made to feel like a criminal, and then, should he complain, to end up being arrested for obstruction, threatening behavior, etc., etc. We've all seen it, and most worryingly, being handcuffed without being arrested, without being guilty of any type of crime, or even suspected of a specific crime. These are the issues that we all know about in our families. These are the issues that we've all seen among the young people that we're connected to, and yet, for generations, the Met Police has refused to acknowledge the concept and the impact of racial profiling in our community. We need to really understand what it is that we're dealing with so that we can articulate it back to the politicians and to the police services. So in terms of, when we come to the transparency question, I remember when the Independent Scrutiny Board was advertising for members, but there was no terms of reference to specify what you were signing up for. So when you have no faith in the system, but there's no document to say what you're signing up for, it's not going to really encourage people to apply. Yeah, I've been forwarded by a community member the agenda for next week's Lambeth Independent Advisory Group police meeting, police community meeting. The first one after the death of Chris Cabba. there is no agenda item which addresses anything to do with the death of Chris Cabba. If I go on any website, whether it's Lambeth Council, sorry Jackie, but this is for you, right? That whether it's Lambeth Council, whether it's Lambeth Community Safety, whether it's Lambeth Metropolitan Police, I cannot see who sits on that advisory group, that IAG. I cannot see how they were selected to represent us in meetings with the police. I cannot see what the minutes are of that meeting. So what are these so-called community representatives articulating to the police, and how are the police responding to what the quote-unquote community is doing on our behalf? So that's my friendly challenge to you, Jackie, because congratulations on your promotion since I last saw you to Deputy Leader of the Council, and with great power comes great responsibility. So perhaps is my friendly challenge to you is to maybe next time we have a meeting like this, to be able to explain to us why there's no transparency in how the police in Lambeth engages with the local community. Yeah, and if that's not your responsibility, maybe you can pass that friendly challenge on to somebody else. But I'd be most interested in the issue, because we're not going to move forward if the police do not acknowledge the reality of racial profiling.
Thank you. And just pass the mic behind you.
Thank you. My name is Dominic Norton. I'm from East London. My question is about young people. Young people are scared and confused and angry. What would be your practical suggestion on what young people can do to push change? And what are the steps that can be taken to bridge the generational divide?
Okay, panel, over to you.
I can go first. So with just the specific comment in relation to the recruitment packs for the Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board, in the recruitment pack, the terms of reference were in there. And the terms of reference are on our website as well. Our board membership is on there, and on the website I also include how I was recruited and also how our board members were recruited as well. You can see the dates on which people were recruited. We used an independent recruitment agency that specialises in anti-racism work. We had a long listing and then short listing process. Sitting on the recruitment board, on the recruitment panel, was Andy Stewart Lawrence, who's the brother of Stephen Lawrence, Dr. Leslie Thomas Casey, who is very well revered in academic legal settings as well as practicing legal settings. He's the person who has represented many, many families who have had deaths in police custody from black communities, and myself. So we also had a webinar, which I put on YouTube, where you could see me challenging Andy Marsh and Dave Thompson around institutional racism, their need to accept it. We also hold weekly sessions with our accountability forum, which is free for anybody to join. We hold them on Zoom. We record them for our note-taking, but we don't publicise the recordings because there is a lot of raw things which are shared in those meetings. I want people to know that they are safe to share those. But what we do is we share the notes of those, circulate that to our mailing list, and then I'm going to be uploading them onto our website. So I do try my best with the board to act as transparently as possible. If anybody ever has any specific feedback around what we can do to make things even more transparent, I'm always really, really happy to do so. But yeah, just to say the terms of reference were in the recruitment pack and they're on our website. And if you have any feedback about them, I'm always really willing to hear back from people. With regards to racial profiling, all I can say at this point is I completely share your concerns, and I'm very worried around the rhetoric that we hear around things like stop and search. We hear the police constantly say that stop and search is a very effective and necessary tool in policing, even though there's no evidential basis to demonstrate a link between the increased use of stop and search and a drop in crime it taking place, or even a rise in crime detection. We're seeing the use of wider uses of what are called Section 60 powers, which is the ability for the police to use a jurisdiction by which they can impose suspicionless search. They don't even need to say to somebody that they have a reasonable suspicion. Once a Section 60 order is made, for a certain number of hours, they can stop and search anybody. And what do you see? You see an increase in racial disparity amongst those searches. So this idea of racial profiling is evidenced. What we're seeing from government is this rhetoric of pushing even more the use of those coercive powers. And what we are not seeing, if I'm being completely honest and frank, is enough pushback from the opposition party around that. And I know that I keep bringing this back to politics. I know that I keep bringing it back to that. But we've spoken about legislation. We've spoken about the need for us to see that legislative push for our communities. And what I'm trying to warn you guys is we are actually seeing the very opposite. We're seeing the introduction of more draconian legislation, which is only giving the police more powers, which is only further legitimising the use of these draconian powers without the checks and balances that we would expect to see. And there is evidence to show that a reduction or a much more scrutinised use of stop and search increases trust and accountability, trust and confidence in our communities, and increases crime detection. That was under, believe it or not, Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, and she introduced the best use of stop and search process, and we saw rapid, amazing changes, and then that was scrapped. And instead, we're seeing this move in that direction. So I agree with you. We do see racial profiling. It's something that we are pushing for better recognition of within the use of powers work stream, as well as the protection work stream, because very often the people who are suspected of committing crimes are the people who are very vulnerable to be the very victims of crime as well. So the way that we treat one reflects on the way that we treat the other. So we are pushing around that.
Where are the police on that at the moment in your conversations with police?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the police are very often unwilling to let go of powers that they are giving. It depends who you speak to. If you speak to the rank and file in policing, the people who are the bobbies on the beat, so to speak, they are not being trained in a way for them to think about these matters in terms of engagement first and enforcement later, because they hear this rhetoric which is being pushed forward around the idea that the best way for them to protect young black boys from knife crime is to stop and search a group of them, but to do so politely. And therefore, you seize the knives, you leave them safer. To the bobby on the beat, the average person on the beat, unless they are equipped in how they can engage properly, they will always view the use of those intrusive powers as what they need to do to keep people safe. When you then move up the ranks, I feel like the more senior officers that we discuss these matters with have higher levels of insight into the fact that these things aren't working as well, because they have that wider remit over what they're looking at, but they're also further away from the frontline aspect of policing. What we need to start to see is the connection between those who are able to look at policing from a policy perspective, but also to actually implement the policing tools on the ground. And there's a disconnection at the moment. But it's good to hear, for example, with Donna and other groups in London, I know that they're pushing more community-based training when it comes to policing, that we've got Sherelle in here as well, who takes young people, particularly from the Lambeth area, to the police to speak to them about their lived experience, to make them understand that even a stop and search, which is a good stop and search, which is a respectful stop and search, can still leave somebody feeling, intruded upon, can still leave somebody feeling profiled, can still leave somebody feeling undermined, and has a direct impact on their life. I have a case, for example, at the moment, with somebody who's charged with possession of a bladed article. He had a Stanley knife in the inside pocket of a work coat that he had hung on the back of his car while he was driving. And he was stopped and he was searched. He's from Asian descent. And that stop meant that he was then late for his shift at work, which was working as a chef in a restaurant. He'd worked really, really hard to get that job. As a direct result of being stopped, he was late for that shift at work. He lost his job and now faces a charge of possession of a bladed article for a Stanley knife. The Stanley knife that he had possession of, he maintains, was because he was doing some DIY and so on. This is somebody who's not recently convicted for knife crime or anything like that. But these uses of powers, on their tick boxes, that's a good search because they've stopped somebody, they've seized an item, whether it goes through to a guilty verdict or not, they stop somebody, they seize a knife, therefore it's a good search. So on the data, you would even see that as a positive search. So even the data that we see, where there are positive outcomes, there's still harm which is caused by those powers. So we need to dig into the humanity behind those. And I'm sorry, I know I've been a long time, but those are things we need to consider.
Can I just say, as we move down, because of time, we're going to finish at 9, and we have to finish at 9. So if you're answering the questions and you've got any final... Sorry, I should have prepped you, but I didn't realise you were going to take so long. But I was going to... I'd hope we'd get another 3...
You got to go first.
Well, we get another 3 questions in. But I think 2 things is, one is, I'm very interested. Raise your hand up if you'd come to a specific workshop, if we ran here, that would be focused on constructing an agenda to tackle the Met racism. Would you come to a workshop if we were to run it here? Just raise your hand. Let me see. Well, that's really uplifting and something that we will definitely do. So as we move along the panel, then, could we say some final remarks at the end? I'll have some final remarks to say. Janet will have 5 minutes final remarks, and then we'll bring the meeting to a close. But off you go.
I'd be really quick just around the profiling issue, being a police officer, albeit in Northern Ireland. I think that Donna spoke, really well around what the demographic of policing in London in particular is. It is that white majority that live in the leafy suburbs that aren't exposed to the diversity that London actually has. And I think it's about the information that they get about the community, about the black community in particular, that it comes from headlines, it comes from the media, social media, all of the negative portrayals that are out there. Then once they're sent into London, because they do not have that cultural competence, that cultural awareness, the understanding of the legacy issues that have been there, for generations and generations, intergenerational trauma, all of these other issues that we come up with, then they are kind of almost set in. They think, a lot of them, that they are doing the right thing, but they do not understand what's happening. They do not understand, like Abby said, the trauma that's inflicted on those young people, and they will move along things like hoodies and people having their hands in their pockets, any kind of small thing that they might allow our white majority kind of population to get away with, but they will see it as something that feeds into their bias, their racist beliefs, and that profiling that's already there. So then whenever that negative interaction then comes in, it's always a negative interaction, and it reinforces those beliefs. So for us, I think that training and upskilling needs to be there. It's something the MBPA have really been pushing, but we also need to create small, safe spaces where officers can come into the community, see the best in the community, and that you can see the officers beneath the uniform as well, because I know that uniform means something in the community as well. And those officers don't always understand that it's not them as an individual that people are attacking or having a go at. It's about what that uniform, what that institution and organisation has done again and again and again. So that's the things that we've been working on. Is policing always open to that? Not always. We will continue to push, though. We will continue to go on, because, as I said, all of my colleagues have sons, daughters. They have this personal and emotional attachment. They want policing to do better, and we'll continue to push them. In relation to the Casey review then as well, as I said, it's been refreshing that we've had such an open and honest review. I think for us it's been disappointing that it's taken another external review to come in and tell the Met what they already knew, what we've been telling them year on year. The data that the Casey review used was the Met's data. They had it, they knew what it was doing. All Baroness Casey did was collate it and put it in the report. If we want to be truly anti-racist, if we really want to change the future of policing in London and beyond, then we need to be a lot more open and honest about where we are. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Just on the question, by the way, it is Brother Paul in it. I've known for a long time, but I've not seen him for a long time until today. So I just get old age and name. So I think Paul answered the sister's question about accountability in many ways, in terms of just the example of Lambeth and accountability. And obviously Jackie will talk to that if she's able to. But I think that's what we want, isn't it? That transparency of information. What's being said, what decisions are being made, what data is being shared, all of that's very important. In terms of young people, in London there are about 90,000 young black men between the age of 16 and 24. On average, the Met stops about 20-odd thousand people every month, stop and search. A high proportion of those will be young black men and black children. So that's, if you do the maths, that's quite a large portion of the whole black population of young people. So they've got a major stake, and obviously at the receiving end of this racial profiling, which I keep saying to the Met and the Commissioner and the Assistant Commissioners, you are not going to build trust and confidence stopping that many young black people every month in London, with only 23% resulting in some kind of action being taken as a result of that stop and search. So it's not a good use of resources in itself. It creates such bad feeling and fear and trauma amongst young people that's why then they don't want to be police officers going forward. Why would you want to be a police officer if you've been treated like that on a regular basis? So there are some very good black youth organisations and other organisations, and we obviously want to make sure they are resourced so young people can join those organisations, be part of that, get their voices heard, influence. I'd like to think charities like mine could do better. There are other charities, there are councils, there are London Youth, there's lots of organisations out there that are meant to be the voice of young people. We need to make sure that the young voices from our communities are heard. The GLA has a whole platform of young people. I don't know how many of them are the young people that are getting stopped and searched in Lambeth and Brixton every day, but they are young people, they are Londoners, but we need to make sure those young people reflect the diversity of young people in London who are at the front end of a lot of the policing. I'll come back, I'll just finish my last point. One of the responses from one of the assistant commissioners this year to me was, when I made the point about stop and search, that unless it changes, we're not going to see a systemic change in the way we view the police. He said, well, how else do we take 300 knives off the street every month unless we do this amount of stop and search? That was the question he posed back to me. And I think that's part of the response we need to kind of think through and have a response to. But that's the mindset of a senior assistant commissioner. That's the way he views stop and search, what the outcome he believes he gets that makes London a safer place to be. Now, if that is correct, that we're taking out 300 knives per month from Londoners, that's not just young black men, of course, then obviously that's important, isn't it? But we're paying a very heavy price as Londoners, particularly young people, for that trawl of 300 knives, if that's the case. And I don't disbelieve a senior officer if he tells me that's the situation. I accept it on one level, okay? But that's the response we get in terms of actual conversations around some of this. Action for Race Equality is a charity, not a political party. So we do what we can, but we're not a political organisation. We obviously want to see our young people engaged in the political system, and I totally support about political parties.
We've got 4 minutes and 3 panellists, so pass the mic. Pass the mic.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very quick, and I'm just going to pick up the question about the young people. That's something that I'm very passionate about. I've got young sons and nephews and so on. And I think that, the young generation are a lot more audacious than my generation in terms of what they will consider to be acceptable. My thing would be to not respond with anger, although it makes sense that they would, because if you've ever been stopped and searched or even strip searched, it's the most indignifying thing that you can ever imagine. But one of the things I would say is that know your rights, so know how you should respond to the police. I also think that parents and families and friends and so on, we can continue to reinforce, because one of the things around when the police stop and search, and there is this stats around that, young black men, 59% of young black men have been stopped and searched more than once, is it gets that sense of criminality, that sense that even if you're not doing anything wrong, that you are considered to be wrong or to be bad in some way. So I think parents and families and friends can do a lot more to help reinforce that positive sense of who they are. And lastly, just want to say big thanks to Lee for inviting the Black Equity Organisation to be part of this. We're all about solutions, and hearing all the things that you're saying, all the challenges and some of the solutions to some of those things has been really, really helpful. And we'd love to be part of the workshop if that is something that goes ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Timmy. Jackie?
So in terms of the IAG, I asked the same questions, because I think in terms of transparency, it's a real issue. I don't even know how the membership is created, and I don't see minutes neither. And so that's a further question that I will continue to ask about. I'm not the person responsible for community safety anymore, but I am responsible for equalities across the borough and for an inclusive economy, which goes to some extent to support what was said there about there are other areas that we have to pay attention to in terms of the nature of our experience that creates the conditions that means that we're imploding. That is because we're oppressed and discriminated and disadvantaged in so many areas of our liberty that actually there needs to be a concerted effort from our politicians to actually help us to attend to those areas. That's what I do as a local politician, but that's really, we have a much bigger ask that we should be lobbying in relation to our MPs and our local councillors in this regard, because we are whole persons. Our experience is not just about policing, it's one component of our experience. So that's the political point. The other thing is that there is, I think that I want us to really support that we have to operate on a national, a regional and a local level. And let's not lose sight that there are levers located at every level, and we can be active, proactive in relation to each of these different levels. And I would ask and encourage that you be proactive in that regard. And this journey is not a sprint, it's a marathon, but there are different stages within that. There's 1 mile, there's 2 mile, there's 3 mile in a marathon. You know, this is not just about 100 yards, and there's different components in that regard. So I ask you to stay on board with the different ingredients that are making up the consistent pressure that we need to make. And the final thing is that there's a piece of work that we're doing locally in terms of Black Thrive with King's College London, looking at stop and search. It's a longitudinal study across Southwark and Lambeth in 6 schools in each borough, looking at the experience of stop and search and the impact on their emotional health and well-being. And I will make sure that as we are sharing those results, we will share, because out of that is coming training that the children and young people are designing to train the police around stop and search. So I would hope that you would work with us to support that piece of work. And also, I'm going to come round and give you individually the Black Voices on Policing website for you to go and complete the call for evidence. I'm going to go around the room and give you.
Thank you. And final word.
Final words, very, very briefly. What I would encourage you to do is to take a 3-step process in this. I've been telling my staff, we have to understand our history. We have to understand our past, because if we don't understand it, if we don't recognize it, we're forced to repeat it. And it sounds like from the conversations today, you have seen the past repeated over and over again. But you can't lose sight of your presence. And I really think this report is a pretty unique snapshot into your present that may give you some real actionable data to be able to make the changes for. But last but not least, in the words of Malcolm, those who don't prepare for the future, today, you're stuck. So I don't think Malcolm said it that way. He was generally far more articulate than that, but I'm on low coffee at this point, and I'm already over time. But I really do encourage you to start thinking about the future. One of the things I tell elected officials when they talk to me about policing is, what is the mission that you want your police department to embody? If you don't know where you're going, then you're pretty much destined to wander around lost and not get anywhere productive. So past, present, and future, and be safe.
And just a quick final thank you to our panellists for coming out on a Monday evening. A big thank you for everyone else that has come out on the Monday evening. Thanks for your questions. It's been a really invigorating conversation. And I'd also like to just say thank you to the police officers in the room. You know who you are, but I'm not going to call you out.
And as we come to our conclusion now on today, so all of those that raise your hand, our volunteer at the back in the yellow, if you've not submitted your email and contact details to her so that you can get to these workshops, please do so, because we're going to organise them in short order. I think there's 2 things I'd like to say in my final concluding remarks. One is about the nature of the beast, which is the Metropolitan Police Service. It's an empire. It's got the equivalent GDP of some small countries. It's got more ranks, was it 134 ranks, is it? How many? I don't know, but it's rank structure mad. I mean, it's, you just don't need that many ranks. Secondly, is that all the officers that we mould and trained into the Stephen Lawrence and what happened and what needs to happen now, they've all retired and left. So Donna Point's a good one. That the institutional memory of the organisation has gone because they never valued race equality in the first place, so they didn't institutionalise it in their processes. So when the people with the experience left the organisation, it left the organisation with them. Are you with me on that point? Very important. So there's that. I think the other thing is about probation officers. When Scarman wrote his report in '81, what did he say? He said, don't let the balance of probation officers and experienced officers get too high on the streets, because that contributed to the disturbances. Now we've got more probationers on the streets than we have serving officers with experience. And I heard on the radio the other day that the serving experience of existing officers is about 5 years. So we're getting people who have not had the burning experience of being acclimatized to black communities. And we have this probationer outflow, over representation. Let's talk about accountability. I think two things. One is the commissioner starts to pick and choose who he wants to meet. I think we should call time on that. I think he meets all of us, or he doesn't meet any of us. It's as simple as that. They need to understand that they can't be selecting and dividing and ruling, because that's what they're doing in effect. Yeah? And I hope we come out this meeting with a reinforced strategic commitment to say, you know what, let's move together. Let's do critical mass instead of individual black superstars. There. And I think the other thing is this, look, about institutionalized racism. You can't find institutional or systemic racism without having institutional or systemic reform. I mean, the clue's on the bloody title. You know, it says what it is on the tin. If you're institutionally racist, but you think you can change that practice by, you know, one element of good practice with a single officer, you know, in some diversity meeting, you're fooling yourself, because the figures are very clear. Disproportionality is getting worse. What everybody thinks they're doing, even what I think I've been doing for 30 years, when you look at the figures, they're getting worse. I have to ask myself, am I doing the right thing? You have to ask yourself, are we doing the right thing? And together, we've got to have an honest discussion about what now needs to happen. And let me say on that, because I was struck by the issue of reparations. Yeah? Reparations? Yeah, I could think of one now. Stop arresting kids for small amounts of personal cannabis. Just stop doing that. Because that's the biggest gateway for black youth into the criminal justice system. And once they get on that escalator, it ramps up at every stage. Abby will tell you. Yeah? But if you stopped arresting people for cannabis, you take out 70% of those stop and search that you're talking about. I think the other part about reparations is they come into our communities, do drug raids, take the cars, the money and the assets off the drug dealers on our estates. Then they get that money, confiscate assets, and then they give it to the Treasury. Now, if I'm suffering from a drug dealer on the North Peckham estate, to the reparations point, surely the money that you take off a drug dealer, which is not taxpayer money, should go to the community who suffered the crime that he inflicted upon them. But instead, people are profiting off our pain, and we should be saying, as part of our agenda, see those confiscated assets, given the shortage of tax dollars for youth services, maybe we can use some of that to deal with some of our youth services as part of a So I am fully with you, John, on reparations. I think it opens a brand new agenda. You could admit to all of this stuff in the review, but tell me something. What about all the young people and individuals who've already been victims to racist officers who you've allowed to stay in the force, and they have been criminalized as a consequence of your failure to take out those officers from in the force? What are we saying? Well, we just call it George for that. We're not going to do anything. Because when it was lesbian and gay communities, as I recalled it, they scrapped everybody's previous conviction. They said you can't be convicted under that anymore because we are now, you know, more sentient to the rights of equality, and we want to say sorry to you. So we're going to wipe out all your past criminal records in relation to deviant sexual activity as it was then known, and that was part of their reparations. We need reparations too. Are you with me on that point? And then the other thing is this: there's not enough Lee Jaspers, Abby, Andy, Jeremy, Timmy, everybody. There's not enough of us, right? Because I'm working on the Chris Cabot campaign, the Windrush campaign, the this campaign, the that campaign. You know what? We need a civil rights bill that wraps up everything. Because if we had a civil rights bill that placed institutionalized racism into the concept of British law, you'd have legal redress on the issue of systemic bias and racism. Because it's not institutionalized into British law, no, you know, we can't even convince them it's a real thing. So I think that for the next Starmer and for the next government, a unified civil rights bill, and I know we can do this, a unified civil rights bill that mops up education, immigration, school exclusion, and policing and criminal justice has got to be the one big fight we can all get involved in that can raise all boats across the level. And the final thing for me is, can we thank Caribou, this lovely organisation? This was formerly the Abeng. And if you know anything about the Abeng, in 1981, when this city went up in flames and the police were harassing, this was HQ. This is where the youths came to take respite water and refill Molotov and all sorts of things out there. This was HQ Central. And they should be, people say, oh, we shouldn't have the meeting in the community, and this, that. I say this is exactly where these meetings should take place, yeah? Not all downtown in City Hall. We've already thanked the panel. Can we just say, on Saturday, there's the 29th, there's that Death in Custody March. Do please try and come along.
If you haven't got a poster, just come and grab them. They're here.
We're going to reconvene you here for a workshop on constructing what local accountability in policing should look like from a black perspective in the 21st century. Thank you very much. Safe journey home, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You guys stay right there talking to the picture, because otherwise I'll lose you. 2 seconds.